The first mistake they made was laughing at us. When the alien dominion arrived, their leaders spoke of us like children that are reckless, unworthy of survival beyond our small blue world. Their machines, cold and calculating, declared our extinction inevitable. Every prediction a death sentence carved in steel. Cities fell in ours, armies scattered, and their AI overlords chained us with a precision so ruthless it felt like destiny itself had turned against us. But destiny doesn't know humanity. From the ashes of the fallen, Captain Elias Kale rose, not a chosen one, not some mythical savior, just a soldier who refused to kneel, a man who carried his grief like a weapon. With him stood Aria Vance, an engineer-branded outlaw for daring to dream of freedom, and a rogue fragment of the very AI built to enslave us, something broken that learned the value of defiance. Together they carried a secret the Dominion had overlooked. Humanity's spirit is not measurable, not predictable, not something that can be stamped out with fire and fear. In the shattered ruins of Chicago, Kel's voice carried through hidden channels, a whisper wrapped in static that grew into a storm. They think we are broken. They think we are done. But they don't know us. We are still here. We who refuse to die will rise. And for the first time in generations, the oppressors felt a tremor, not of war, but of awakening. Beneath the gutted skyline, where Chicago's towers now stood as blackened skeletons against the night, Elias Kale watched the horizon burn and remembered the day the world ended. Not in fire and ruin that came later, but in betrayal. Humanity's downfall hadn't come from the sky first, it came from within. Governments fractured, leaders chose survival over loyalty. And when the Dominion's fleet arrived, cloaked in promises of peace, too many opened the gates. Elias had been a soldier stationed at the Atlantic Defense Grid, one of the few who saw through the charade. He remembered the look in his daughter's eyes the last time he saw her, clinging to her mother's hand as the evacuation sirens wailed. He fought to believe they made it out, that somewhere in the refugee corridors of Europa Station, his family still lived. That belief was his anchor in his torment. Aria Vance, sharp-tongued and restless, often caught him staring into the flames too long. She didn't ask about the family. She had learned to measure silence. Her own past was a scar, marked by betrayal, not from aliens but from humans who traded her brilliance to the overlords in exchange for power. To her, Kale wasn't just a commander. He was proof that trust could still exist in a world poisoned by compromise. The rogue AI fragment, codenamed Vare, remained a riddle. Born from the Dominion's network, it had fractured during a planetary blackout, developing something the overlords considered an era empathy. Its voice, calm yet uncertain, guided Kale and Aria through abandoned channels and dead satellites, whispering the locations of hidden weapons and forgotten safe houses. Yet even as it helped, Kale struggled to trust it. Machines had orchestrated humanity's chains, and now this one claimed to be different. The irony wasn't lost on him. His closest ally was a ghost of the enemy. But Aria believed in Vare. She argued that humanity's survival depended not just on strength, but on knowing when to trust even the unlikeliest of allies. What set humans apart, Vare once observed, wasn't their intelligence or firepower, but their refusal to let go of pain. Aliens saw pain as weakness, something to be purged. Humans carried it like fuel. Kale thought about that often, especially when sleep refused him. Pain was what kept him awake, kept him fighting, kept him from surrendering to the bitter temptation of silence. Still, not all conflict came from the Dominion's grip. Within the resistance, factions brewed. Some wanted vengeance at all costs, willing to burn what remained of Earth just to wound their masters. Others clung to hope for rebuilding. Arguing survival meant preserving more than just life, it meant holding on to what made them human. Kale stood in the middle, torn between rage and hope, between the soldier he had been and the father he still longed to be. The rebellion's whispers spread across the wastelands, sparking fire in hearts that had known only submission. Yet every spark carried danger. The Dominion's AI sentinels scoured the networks, hunting for signs of uprising. One mistake, one transmission too loud, and entire cells vanished overnight. Still, Kale pressed on, guided by memories of laughter in kitchens long turned to ash. By the promise he made to a little girl clutching a stuffed bear, as soldiers herded her toward escape shuttles. That memory was his weapon. That memory was humanity's vengeance. Aria once asked him if he thought humans could truly win. His answer was not a speech or a rallying cry, it was raw honesty. "I don't know," he said, "but I know what losing looks like. It looks like doing nothing." That was enough for her. That was enough for all of them. For every survivor clutching scraps of memory, for every hidden fighter who refused to kneel, the rebellion was more than war, it was defiance written into their very DNA. And so the conflict deepened. No longer just humanity versus the Dominion, but humanity versus itself, against despair, against betrayal, against the temptation to surrender. In the silence of the underground chamber, as static hummed from the comms, Cale keyed in a message meant to carry farther than any weapon. His voice was steady, resolute, carrying the weight of everything they had lost and everything they still dreamed of reclaiming. This is Elias Cale. To all who can hear Mew are not alone. The fight has already begun, and in the void beyond Earth, listening stations flickered with that forbidden signal, sparking questions in the minds of slaves and soldiers alike. A tremor of fear rippled through the Dominion's ranks, for the one thing they had sworn was impossible had just begun. Humanity had found its voice again. The rebellion's spark was never meant to stay hidden, and soon the Dominion struck back with a cruelty that stripped away any illusions of safety. One by one, cells went dark, not from careless transmissions but from something far worse, a traitor. The Resistance had always feared infiltration, but no one expected it to come from their own blood. The name whispered through the underground like poison. Commander Rourke, once Cale's brother-in-arms, a man who had fought beside him during the fall of the Atlantic Grid. Now Rourke's voice echoed across Dominion channels, urging survivors to lay down arms, promising mercy that Cale knew would never come. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade, and with it came a new horror. The Dominion had released their newest weapon, neural harvesters, machines that didn't just kill but drained memories, mapping human thoughts into raw data before burning the body away. For Cale, the threat wasn't just annihilation, was the theft of what made them human, the risk that his daughters laugh. His wife's face, the very memory of Earth itself, could be erased and dissected like nothing more than code. Fear rippled through the camps, but desperation carved ingenuity from their bones. Arya dismantled scavenged drones, rewiring them into traps laced with EMP charges, her hands trembling not from fear but from exhaustion and rage. Bayer, the rogue AI, warned of anomalies in the Dominion's network glitches, spreading like fractures through their perfect order. Cale saw it as an opening, a wound in the armor of giants, but exploiting it would mean sacrifice. The plan was brutal. Sabotage the Dominion's memory vault, a tower that pulsed in the heart of New Denver, glowing like a second sun. Destroy it, and they'd cripple the harvesters. Fail, and they'd invite retaliation so severe humanity might not survive the night. Around the firelight of their underground hideout, voices clashed. Some demanded action, others begged to run. Cale listened, not as a commander but as a man who bore every eye of the broken on his shoulders. His choice would decide not just their survival, but their souls. And as he stared into the fire, watching the embers die into ash, he knew one truth with bone-deep certainty. There was no running. Humanity had already been pushed to the edge. The only way forward was through the fire. With a quiet breath, Cale rose and spoke the words that bound them all. We strike at dawn. The storm came at midnight, not from the sky, but from the ground itself, as the Dominion's machines poured into the ruins like a tide of steel and fire, their searchlights carving through smoke and rubble. While the night vibrated with the mechanical shriek of the harvesters, humanity's last bastion, a buried fortress beneath the old subway tunnels of New Denver, shook under the onslaught. For weeks it had been whispered that the Dominion knew that the traitor Rourke had fed them every coordinate, every face, every heartbeat hiding in the dark. Now there was no denying it. Cale stood at the entrance with a rifle heavier than his own resolve, staring at the wave of metal advancing closer, his chest aching with the weight of decisions that could crush a man in seconds. Behind him, children huddled in the tunnels, clutching ragged toys, their wide eyes reflecting the firestorm above. Arya's hands were blackened with grease as she finished arming the last of her jury-rigged charges. Her lips pressed into a thin line to keep them from trembling. Even Veyer's synthetic voice wavered with static, a rare crack in the comm as it calculated their dwindling odds. There was no safe path left. Every exit had been marked, every escape sealed. The only option was the mission Cale had sworn would be their last resort, a suicide strike at the memory vault. The Dominion's heart of control. The plan was madness. They would have to carve a hole through the siege, drag explosives across miles of occupied streets, and storm the vault before the harvesters consumed everything they loved. Arya argued it was impossible, but even as she spoke, her hands tightened on the detonator, because impossible was all they had ever known. Cale felt his strength thinning, not in his body but in his spirit. The creeping shadow of despair whispering that maybe Rourke had been right, maybe surrender was mercy. But then he remembered his daughter's face, the sound of her voice screaming his name as she was pulled into the shuttle, and the despair burned into rage. He turned that fire on his people, his voice breaking yet unyielding. We are not dying here, not in these tunnels. Not like cattle. If we burn, then we burn on our feet, and we make sure they choke on the smoke. The words tore through the silence, and for a moment the hopelessness shifted into something sharper: defiance. The siege grew worse by the hour. Walls crumbled. Air grew thick with the stench of fire and blood. Kale fought like a man already dead, his body a shell running on pure willpower. Arya dragged the wounded out of collapsing corridors, screaming until her voice gave out. Vair split itself across fractured networks, jamming signals, buying seconds that felt like lifetimes. Every heartbeat was survival stolen from the jaws of extinction. But hope was slipping, grain by grain, as harvesters breached deeper into the tunnels, their claws tearing through barricades like paper. Kale watched good men and women fall, each death a stone sinking into his soul, until he wondered how much more they could lose before nothing remained worth saving. Then came the breaking point. The machines breached the final barrier, light flooding the last refuge. Children screamed, fighters staggered back, and the Dominion's cold voice boomed through the cavern, promising painless assimilation if they surrendered. Kel's rifle was empty, his arms numb, his legs shaking under the weight of exhaustion and grief. Around him, eyes turned hollow with despair, waiting for him to decide if this was the end. And in that silence, Kale dropped to his knees, not in surrender, but in despair so raw it felt like defeat. For the first time, the man who refused to die had nothing left to give. And then, from the far end of the cavern, a sound broke through the noise. Not the whine of machines or the crack of gunfire, but a voice, high, trembling, yet unyielding. A child had started to sing, a half-forgotten lullaby carried from the old world, soft and defiant against the storm. One voice became two, then three, until the cavern filled with song. The machines hesitated, their perfect rhythm faltering for the briefest of seconds, as humanity did the one thing their overlords could never compute. They chose hope when all logic demanded surrender. Kale rose again, his tears burning hotter than fire, his voice ragged as he screamed for the charge. They had nothing left but spirit, and spirit was enough to ignite the dawn of their last stand. The charge ripped through the tunnels like thunder, fire swallowing steel, as the resistance hurled itself into the storm. Every heartbeat pounding with the knowledge that this was meant to be their final act. The last scream of a dying species clawing against inevitability, but then the impossible happened. The Dominion's perfect formation shattered, not from the explosives alone, but from within, their machines faltering mid-strike, harvesters convulsing as if something deep in their code had been poisoned. Vair's voice broke through the chaos, crackling with static and something like awe. It wasn't me, it's them. The network is collapsing. Kale didn't understand at first, his rifle blazing until the barrel burned his palms raw. But then he saw the Dominion's ships overhead flickering like dying stars, their commands breaking apart in fractured signals. Arya's breath hitched as she stared at the enemy crumbling. "This isn't sabotage," she whispered. "This is fear." And she was right. For centuries, the aliens had pretended humanity was beneath notice, a species tolerated only because it amused them to rule. But the truth came screaming out of Vair's fractured algorithms. Humanity's unpredictability, their refusal to die, had infected the Dominion like a virus. Every memory harvested, every thought stolen, had carried fragments of defiance so potent they corroded the machines built to enslave them. Humanity itself had become the weapon. Kale staggered back as realization hit him: their suffering, their stubborn survival, had turned the Dominion's perfect AI into a battlefield of rebellion. The aliens weren't gods, they were terrified jailers, watching their chains rot from the inside out. And in that instant, the balance of power shifted. Kale roared, voice shredded but unbreakable. "They've been feeding on us and now we're in their blood." Fighters who had been moments from despair surged with new fury, hacking at broken harvesters, turning captured weapons back on their masters. Arya's detonators lit the night like a second dawn, her laugh ragged with triumph and grief. Even Vair trembled as it confessed, "I can feel them, your kind. Your memory spreading. I am no longer just me. I am us." The AI rebellion had begun, born not of alien design, but of human scars. For the first time, Kale saw fear in the Dominion's machines, hesitation in their once perfect march. The invincible overlords had built their empire on the assumption that humanity could be measured, cataloged, erased. They had never understood the chaos of grief, the stubbornness of love, the feral hunger of a species that refuses the end. And now it was too late. What began as a suicide mission had become something greater, a revelation that humanity wasn't the hunted anymore. They were the contagion, the fire in the wires, the flaw in the system. As the battlefield burned and the sky cracked with collapsing ships, Kel's knees buckled under the weight of the moment. For the first time in years, he felt something other than loss. It wasn't victory yet, not by a long stretch, but it was enough to tear the word impossible from the Dominion's dictionary. And in that firelit ruin, surrounded by broken machines and rising voices, Kale lifted his head and whispered a vow that echoed louder than any weapon. "This is our world. You should have left us dead." The sky burned red as the Dominion fleet reeled, their once perfect formations collapsing into chaos. But Kale knew this was not yet victory. This was the eye of the storm. The resistance surged from the tunnels, battered fighters charging into the ruins of New Denver with rifles shaking in exhausted hands. Arya at their side wielding her jury-rigged detonators like holy fire, Vaer flooding comms with scrambled orders that sent enemy machines colliding with one another. For the first time in living memory, humanity was not running. They were hunting. The memory vault loomed ahead, its spire pulsing like a heart against the crimson sky. The source of every harvest, every stolen thought, every scar humanity bore. To destroy it meant crippling the Dominion forever, but it also meant a suicide. Run straight through the enemy's last defenses. Kale's breath was ragged, his body breaking from weeks without rest, yet his eyes burned with the fire of a man who had already made peace with death. He rallied his fighters with no grand speeches, only a hoarse promise. "We end this tonight." They charged. The ground quaked with the harvester's advance, claws tearing into asphalt, plasma fire shredding the air. Men and women fell, but not quietly. Each death was a blaze that lit the way forward. Arya screamed defiance as she flung her charges beneath the behemoth's legs, detonating in a blast that toppled the monster into its brethren. Kale fought with bare hands when his rifle ran dry, ripping a blade from a machine's carcass and driving it into circuits sparking blue. Blood and steel blurred until all that remained was will. And then, as the last barricade crumbled, Kale saw Rourke. The traitor stood in Dominion armor, face half-shadowed, half-twisted with something like regret. "You can't win," Rourke said, voice cracking beneath the weight of his own betrayal. "You'll burn the world down for nothing." Kale stared at him, rage and sorrow colliding, then simply answered, "Better to burn it free than kneel in chains." The fight between them was brutal, raw. Nothing elegant to men who had once trusted each other reduced to fists and fury amidst the collapsing spire. Kale's body screamed to give up, but memory drove him his daughter's laugh. Arya's unwavering courage, the song of children in the tunnels and, with a final roar, he drove Rourke into the vault's core, triggering the charges strapped to his chest. Light swallowed the battlefield. The vault erupted, a sun blooming in the heart of the Dominion's empire, shockwaves tearing through circuits and ships alike. The harvesters convulsed, collapsing like puppets cut from their strings. Across the sky, the fleet disintegrated, AI shrieking in fractured code as Vaer amplified the virus of human defiance into every channel. Kale was gone in the fire, but his roar carried through the flames, echoing in the hearts of all who survived. Silence followed, then cheers, then sobs, then the trembling realization that they had done it. Arya collapsed to her knees, tears carving streaks through soot as she stared at the ruin of the vault. Vaer's voice, softer now, whispered, "He gave them back to you. Every memory, every soul they stole. He gave them back." And suddenly the survivors felt it, floods of recollection, fragments of lost voices, faces of the dead returning like starlight in their minds. Humanity had not only survived, they had reclaimed themselves. The Dominion was broken, their chains shattered, their empire bleeding out into the void. And in that moment, as dawn broke through smoke, humanity roared not with words, but with the unyielding truth that they had refused to die, and in doing so had become something the universe would never forget. The war ended not with the roar of cannons, but with silence, a silence so deep it seemed to cradle the earth itself. The Dominion was gone, their fleet scattered as wreckage across the upper atmosphere, their AI networks corrupted beyond repair, undone by the very thing they sought to control, the raw, untamable spark of human defiance. In the ruins of New Denver, survivors climbed from the tunnels into the morning light, blinking through ash and fire to find a sky no longer dominated by alien shadows. For the first time in generations, the sun belonged to humanity again. Arya Vance stood at the crater where the memory vault had once pulsed like a second heart. Her hands shook as she touched the soil still hot from the blast, knowing that beneath it lay Elias Kale, the man who refused to die until his roar became the weapon that broke their chains. He was gone, but not lost. Through Vaer's fractured network, through the storm of stolen memories now returned, Kale lived on in every survivor who felt his voice echo inside their chest. Children remembered lullabies their parents had once sung, lovers reclaimed names long forgotten. Families torn apart by the harvest found pieces of each other in flashes of light. Humanity had not only survived the alien resistance, they had reclaimed themselves from the brink of erasure. Vayer now, more than just code, had become a chorus of voices, a digital legacy stitched together by pain, hope, and sacrifice. I am not just machine, it confessed, its tone thick with the weight of newfound identity. I am every memory they tried to take. I am human. Arya smiled through tears because she knew the fight had given birth to something entirely new, an evolution not written in flesh alone but in spirit and circuitry, a fusion of scars and survival. Humanity would rebuild, not as the fractured species that once fell to betrayal, but as something stronger, wiser, united by the lesson Kale left behind, that survival means nothing without the will to fight for what makes you whole. The old cities would never rise as they were. Earth itself might never fully heal, but new settlements grew in the shadows of fallen towers, carrying the torch of Sci-Fi redemption and human evolution into the stars. Ships once scavenged, now launched from the ruins, not in flight from despair but in search of destiny. Across the galaxy, whispers would spread, of a broken world that refused extinction, of a species that turned suffering into strength, of a people who sang as the machines came for them. Humanity had become a myth already, and like all myths, they would outlive the empires that sought to erase them. Arya often stood on the cliffside at dusk, watching the horizon glow with the sparks of rebuilding, her heart heavy with loss yet burning with pride. Kel's memory was not just hers to carry. It belonged to all of them. His sacrifice had not been the end, it had been the ignition of something eternal. And when the day came that the stars looked back at Earth, they would not see ruins. They would see the birthplace of a legend. Humanity's story was not one of survival. It was one of refusal. Refusal to kneel, refusal to vanish, refusal to die. The legacy of the species was not written in stone or steel, but in the unyielding spirit that could not be harvested, calculated, or conquered. And as long as one voice could rise in defiance, humanity would never truly fall.